Hi guys, we're back. We're continuing reading The Prince Warrior by Priscilla Schreier. And last week we left Evan and Xavier in the cave where they had got part of their armor. No swords, but they've got their armor. We met the not troll creature, Ruach, and I'm going to give you a secret here, okay? So if you go to the website, there's a lot of secrets in here that you can check out yourself. It's under the Prince Warriors. So Ruach to the Prince Warriors, he said, Ahordius is a real world, he said, and here you are who you always were supposed to be. You are Prince Warriors. The world you live in, day to day, the world is but a shadow of the real world. This is the world where the battles rage, where your real enemy lies. The enemy will do everything in his power to distract you, to discourage you, to delay you, to defeat you. He is always near in Ahordius. This is his dwelling place. The evidence of his schemes is much more apparent in Ahordius than it is on earth. So what's the meaning? Ahordius means unseen in Greek. In the Prince Warriors series, it is the name of the unseen realm in which the warriors must learn to wage war and claim their victories against the real enemy who lives there. Even though they cannot see Ahordius when they are on the earth, it is a place they cannot ignore if they want to survive the problems that they are facing on earth. The truth is, there really is an unseen realm called heavenly places. In Ephesians 6:12, and you, the warriors, are to wage the war knowing that this world includes the unseen realm and that you wage war both in the seen and the unseen realms at the same time. There is an enemy who hopes you'll ignore the unseen realm and his schemes to defeat you. This way, he can continue to take advantage of you. But starting today, you can take Ruach's advice and remember that the unseen world is real and that you can have victory there. So today we're going to continue in it's called Water in the Desert, chapter 5. Evan and Xavier sped down the tunnels until they found themselves once again in the room where they'd first entered the cave. They didn't see any others there. Nothing moved but the floating balls of light. Ruach didn't speak, but unfolded his long arms to the ceiling, his hooded head facing up as well. The boys looked up, wondering what Ruach was looking at, assuming he actually had eyes. They couldn't see anything except rows of glowing blue stalagmites. Then Ruach began rotating his arms in a slow, steady circle. As he did, the stalagmites grew faint, transparent, until they disappeared altogether, revealing a hole in the top of the cave, like a window. The boys stared, wondering what it was that they were seeing through this window. At first, it was just colors, white and red, and then the shapes became clearer. The white began blowing, drifting sand, and the red became a vast, unbroken sky. Whoa, Evan said under his breath. Is that like a TV, or is it real? Is that Ahordius? Said Xavier. It looks way different from what we saw. Yeah, said Evan. No trees, just sand. Hey, Xavier said suddenly, I see someone. He could make out two figures, a boy and a girl, walking through the sand. They looked lost and very tired, trudging listlessly, their heads hanging in exhaustion. I know those guys. Evan moved a few steps closer, squinting against the bright whiteness of the sand world above. They're the kids from the wreck. What are they doing up there? They must find the water, just as you did, Ruach said. Water, Evan said. That place looks like a desert. Where's the water? The water is there. It's always there. Call them. Show them the way. Xavier and Evan looked at each other in confusion. How were they supposed to call to those kids from the underwater cave? They stood there for a minute doing nothing. Ruach moved in close to them, so close they could almost feel his whispered words dancing on the back of their necks. Call to them. Time is running out. So Evan decided to do just that. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to say, but he cupped his hands to his mouth and he shouted up to the ceiling, Hey, you guys, over here! His voice echoed several times, and to his amazement, he could see the echoes rippling through the air. They seemed to rise up and hit the invisible barrier separating the cave from the storm, causing it to tremble. The ripples caught Xavier's attention as well. "It's like we're under the water." He scratched his head in disbelief. Evan shouted again, and then Xavier joined him, sending more ripples upward to the opening. "Over here, in the water! Find the water!" The boy in the desert world suddenly stopped walking and lifted his head, scanning the horizon. He had heard Evan and Xavier call. Xavier could see who he was now. It was Levi, Mr. J.R.'s son. Levi hung with the skateboard crowd, the coolest kids at the wreck. Xavier had wanted to bring a skateboard so many times to join them, but he was too intimidated. He couldn't do all the tricks those kids could do. He thought he remembered the girl too because she often wore the pink sparkly hoodie. Levi walked more purposefully, gesturing to the girl to follow him. He was pointing to something. Evan wondered if he could see the water now, but then something else drew Xavier's attention away. Above the two kids, the red sky began to change. It was getting darker, streaked with purple and black, just the way it had when he and Evan had been running through the dark, menacing forest. Then he remembered the trees splitting and falling and turning to ashes, like the whole world was burning up. This can't be good, he thought. His eyes fell to the horizon because he knew what would happen next. His heart started to hammer in his chest. It was coming, the enemy, the one Ruach had told them about. Those two kids needed to find the water before. Just then, the plume of sand rose up from the ground on the horizon. The wind was picking up, causing more sand to tussle about. "The chaos is coming," Xavier murmured to no one in particular. "What?" said Evan. "It's coming. Look." Xavier pointed. Evan's face went pale, whitewashed by the memory of what he and his brother had gone through to get to the water. The column of sand spun high into the red sky, growing larger as it pulled more and more sand into the vortex. But then more columns spun out of the center column, as if it were growing arms and legs and a head. Two bright beams of light radiated from the head, shaped like eyes, zeroing in on Levi and Brianna. "It's a grobel," said Evan in a soft voice. "A sand grobel. There was one of those in my book, too." "A grobel? What's that?" said Xavier. "It's a creature, a bad creature, made of something not really alive." "They need to hurry," Xavier said, the fear creeping down the back of his neck. He put his hand to his mouth, filled his lungs with more oxygen than he thought he could hold, and he yelled, "Hurry! Get into the water!" Levi saw it too, the huge mountain of sand with the burning white eyes, growing legs and arms. It got bigger and bigger. This was no ordinary sandstorm. "Run!" he shouted to Brianna, taking her hand. He had no idea where to go, but he knew nothing good could come from staying where they were. "Come on, Bean." The two kids ran, covering their eyes against the hot wind that stung their faces and coated the insides of their mouth. When that first breeze had wafted across their burning cheeks, they were grateful. They had been grateful. They needed a breath of breeze after walking in the scorching heat for so long. But this is not what they had expected at all. "Where can we go?" Brianna cried. Levi heard it again. Voices, someone calling. Where was it coming from? He looked ahead of him and saw something. An oasis glimmering on the surface of the sand. Was it really water, or was it only a mirage? "Water," he cried. "We need to get to that water." "Water? Where? Hurry, get to the water." Was the water talking? Brianna fell to her knees, unable to move against the wind any longer. "You go look," she cried. "I'll wait here." She cowered under her hoodie, trying to protect her face. "No, you have to come too," Levi shouted. I can't even see." Levi saw it was useless to try and persuade her, so he left her where she was and struggled on, using his weight to push against the full force of the wind. Thankfully, the oasis he had seen did not disappear, although it wasn't exactly what he thought it would be. As he approached, he realized that he was not seeing one body of water, but several small puddles, as if the oasis had dried up and that was all that was left. Levi put one hand over his mouth to keep from swallowing the hot air, now mixed with grains of sand that burrowed into his skin. He knelt down before one of the puddles and put his free hand into the water. It was cool and wet, but very shallow, too shallow even to lie in for some protection. He crawled over and tried another, hoping that might be a little bit deeper, but it wasn't. He looked over his shoulder, and the sand grobel careening towards him, its arms spread wide enough to snatch up anything in its path. The sky, what could he see of it, was turning a turning canvas of ugly colors, red, black, purple. Time was running out. He had to figure out a way to escape, if not for himself, then for Bean. The puddles merged as if they were their only hope. Levi crawled to another puddle and head ducked low against the strengthening wind, and he dug his fingers into the wet, muddied sand. It was the same as the one before. He splashed some water over his face, wondering how he might be able to bring some over to Bean. Even if he could cup some water in his hands, by the time he got to her, it would be dried up or blown away. He stared at the water. Why was he expecting something to happen? Why had the voices told him to get into the water? It was just a puddle. Get back to Bean, the thought nagged at him. She was still alone. If they were going to be trapped by a monster, they might as well be trapped together. Perhaps he could protect her somehow. He tried to turn and look for her, but the wind was now so fierce he couldn't see more than a foot in front of him. His eyes were tearing up, but when he reached up to wipe them, he saw a movement out of the corner of his eyes. One of the puddles rippled, as if a rock had been skipped across its surface. The wind, he thought, it could soon blow the water away. Then he heard the voices again, barely audible over the shrieking wind. Hurry, get into the water. The voices seemed to be synced with the ripples. He scrambled over to that puddle and peered in. Once the ripples subsided, he thought he saw his own wind-blown face mirrored in the water, as he had in all the others, and then he realized it wasn't his face at all. It was something else. It was the thing that he had first seen over Langdon's head, that strange emblem of Adhortius. He called to Brianna, Bean, come on, I found it. His voice was drowned out by the high-pitched whistle of the wind, the eerie sound of millions of grains of sand crashing into each other. Bean! He screamed as loud as he could, but she didn't hear him. Hurry, get into the water. Get in the water. What good would it do? It was only a puddle after all, but the image was there, and the voices still called to him, making the water tremble even more. He touched the water, feeling a pulling sensation, the same thing that had happened when he had grabbed the weird objects hanging over Langdon's head. Bean, over here, get in the water. It was already pulling him down, his arms, his shoulders, his whole body. He tried one more time, yelling out to Brianna, over here. The water swallowed him. Chapter 6, Puddle Jumping. Levi's feet were cold. They seemed strange, since he was completely submerged in water, wasn't he? He opened his eyes lightly, expecting to see a murky underwater scene. No water. Everything around him glowed blue and white. He let the breath he had taken had been holding out of his aching lungs, and then he breathed in. He could breathe actual air. He looked down at the floor, stone. No wonder it was cold. He had been so hot a moment ago, the wind and the sand burning his face. Sand. He reached up and felt his skin. It was smooth. No sand coating. He shook his head and dusted his hands over his curly hair, expecting a shower of sand over his face, but there was nothing. He was dry and clean. His clothes were different, too. Instead of his Tony Hawk t-shirt and jeans, he was wearing thick gray pants and a shirt with the same weird emblem on it, glowing faintly. He gazed around him at the strange rock formations, the tiny specks of light flitting around his head. He remembered being sucked down into the puddle with the symbol. He thought it had just happened a minute ago, but had time passed he didn't know about? It seemed as though he had woken up in some other, even weirder world. He looked up. 3 people stood before him. 2 were kids. The big one and smaller one was that Xavier, the basketball kid from the wreck, and his little brother? The other person was not quite a person at all, like a little purple blob of something with no face. Welcome to Ahortius, Prince Levi, said the purple blob. His voice boomed through the space, and Levi felt it in the pit of his stomach. So it was the same sort of person. So it must be the same sort of person. As his eyes adjusted, Levi realized that the blob part was actually a robe. We've been expecting you. You have? Levi's throat felt scratchy. He knows my name. That's weird. And he called me a prince. That's even weirder. Where am I? In the cave, the younger kid said. He sounded very confident, like he knew what he was talking about. And that's Reebok. Don't worry, he's not a troll. Ruwak, said Xavier in a disgusted voice. Ruwak. Right, Ruwak, said the younger kid, pronouncing each syllable like it was a separate word. And I'm Evan. Evan. And this is Xavier. Xavier, my brother. You're Levi, right? The skateboarder from the wreck. Levi nodded, and he shook his head like he was trying to shake the sand out of his brain. The storm, the water, went into a puddle, saw that weird thing. The crest of a Hordeus, said the purple dude named Ruwak. That is what led you here. So that's what it is, said Evan. A crest, like knights had on their shields in the old days, the crest of a Hordeus. A horse's. A Hordeus, Xavier said. That's what I said. Xavier shook his head and took a step towards Levi. Your friend is still out there, he pointed up to the ceiling. Levi gazed up in amazement. He could see the monster, the sand grobel, ramping around the desert through a hole in the ceiling. In the ceiling? How was that possible? Brianna, he said. Where is she? Ruwak reached up his really long arms towards the ceiling and began to turn them slowly. As he did, the whole scene shifted perspective to a small mound of pinkish white nearly lost in the blowing sand. Then Ruwak drew his arms downward, and the scene zoomed in close up. Levi could see now that the mound was Brianna. She wasn't moving at all, like she had given up the fight. Levi gasped. I tried to tell her she wouldn't come. He thought he might cry and turned his head so the two boys wouldn't see him. I lost her. She is not lost. Ruwak stepped towards Levi, but his hooded face was still directed upward towards Brianna. Do not fear. I can bring the water to her. Ruwak pointed towards the view, changed again, zooming in on the puddle with the crest of a Hordeus. Levi watched, doubtful. But then Ruwak waved his arms and moved the water. Levi blinked in awe as the puddle of water, the water zoomed across the stretch of sand until it was right in front of Brianna. She didn't see it, though. Her eyes were shut tight. Her face was hidden under her arms. Call to her, Ruwak said. What do you mean, Levi asked, confused. She'll hear you, Evan said. You've got to shout real loud. Levi's brow furrowed. He hesitated. Do it, shouted Evan. Okay. Bean, Levi said, not exactly shouting, and he felt a little foolish. Bean? Evan said, giggling. I mean, Brianna, he said louder, his voice echoing through the cave. Brianna, can you hear me? To Levi's amazement, he saw the window above him start to ripple, as if his words had actually struck some invisible barrier. That's it, said Evan, encouraging. Keep going. Tell her to get in the water. Bean, in the water. Get in the water. The words rippled the barrier again. Brianna raised her head and opened her eyes slightly, then slammed them shut against the onslaught of sand. Even her eyelashes were coated. Then she opened them again, just enough to look down. When she saw the water, her eyes widened even so slightly. She knew the puddle wasn't there a moment ago. Brianna, Bean, get in the water. It's right there. Levi's voice was getting stronger, louder. She could hear him. Brianna put one hand up cautiously, touching the surface of the water very lightly. The barrier rippled again. She sees it, Levi said. Ruwak had brought the water right to her. Get in, Bean. Get in the water, he shouted over and over. The other boys joined in. Brianna still seemed hesitant. The wind picked up, the storm so dense now it was difficult to see her at all other than the very glittery specks of her headband. Don't give up, Bean, Levi looked around frantically and saw a series of ledges of rock formations of the cave. He ran to them, leaping from one to another so he could get close enough to the ceiling. Then he tried to plunge his hand through the barrier in hopes of reaching her. But the invisible barrier just snapped back like a trampoline, knocking him off his feet. He tumbled down. She must come through on her own, said Ruach calmly. Others can call her, and I can make it accessible for her, but she must make the choice on her own. The other two boys shouted and threw small pebbles up at the ceiling, making more ripples. Levi scrambled back on the ledge, joining their chorus, punching the barrier with his hands. Bean, get in! He didn't care any more that the others heard him calling her Bean. All that mattered was getting her out of the storm and into the water. Brianna squinted at the puddle of water in front of her, the symbol of Ahordius, the one that she had seen over Langdon's head shining on the surface. The voices sounded again as if coming from the puddle itself. Get in. She felt sand in her ears, in her mouth, in her nostrils even. The sand grobel loomed over her, its huge sand arms wrapping around her, making it harder and harder to breathe. Yet the water kept talking to her. She touched it, and she felt it pulling, a tugging. She pulled away, the sensation too strange. But the water felt cool, such a relief from the hot, stinging sand. She dipped her whole hand in again. The water began to tug on her hand, pulling her down. She tried to resist, but it felt so nice, so cool and wet and unsandy. She let it pull her arm, her shoulder. She shut her eyes as it pulled her down into the darkness. Brianna coughed, nearly choking on the suffocating sand. She danced around and waving her arms in the air as if still fighting off the grobel. She shook her head frantically to get the sand out of her hair, her face, her mouth, but it took her a moment to realize that there was no more storm anymore. Her skin felt cool, but not wet. She finally opened her eyes, surprised that she could without getting pummeled with sand. She stood very still, taking in her surroundings. Only her eyes roved about, up, down, left, right. Her pink hoodie and striped pants were gone. She was wearing a long gray shirt and leggings, and the strangest of all, there was no sand on her, or water either, for that matter. Maybe she had dreamed that she was being chased by a monster made of sand. Maybe she was still dreaming, a dream within a dream. She felt something grasp her shoulder, and she jumped, giving out a little pant of fright. Bean, are you all right? She spun around, her mouth dropping open in amazement. Levi? She stared at him, shocked that he was there too. I was calling you and calling you. I was scared. You looked like you weren't... He didn't finish. She noticed that he was dry and sand-free as well, and wearing clothes almost identical to hers, and the symbol of Ahordius glowing on his chest. This was getting so weird. Where are we? In a cave, I think. A cave? The cave, said a voice. She turned around to see who had spoken. She saw two boys and a purple bunny, standing together a few feet apart, staring at her. The boys had the same clothes as she and Levi, except they were also wearing some strange accessories, white plates on their chests, belts, and sleek white boots, like they were about to play some game of laser tag. What? She blurted. How come I'm not all sandy? She touched her hair. It wasn't sandy or even messy. Her headband was still in place. There's no sand on you, princess, said another voice. A very deep, resonant voice that echoed all around her. The water has made you clean. She stared at the purple creature. Did it just talk? And did it call me princess? What's going on? She turned to Levi. We were being attacked by a sand monster thing, and then we went into the puddle and ended up here. That's one of the rules, said the little kid, striding forward. You always have to come through the water to get to the cave. That's really important. Don't forget it. And then you have to get your armor on, right, Mr. Redneck? The older kid sighed like he was annoyed. Sorry about him. I'm Xavier, and this is my brother Evan, and we just got here too. Here where? Brianna asked. Welcome to Ahordius, said the talking purple bunny. No, it wasn't a bunny, but it didn't appear to have a face. Maybe it was a fairy. I'm Ruach, your guide while you were here. He's not a troll, said Evan. Evan, said Xavier. Ahordius, Brianna repeated, not quite believing it. Apparently you were right about how to pronounce it, Levi said. We're actually here, Brianna said, in Ahordius, like from my book. She blinked a few times as if still trying to get sand out of her eyes. Were you guys being chased by a sand monster too? It was a sand grobel, corrected Evan, full of confidence. And no, we were in a forest where all the trees were falling on us. And then we came to a big lake and we saw the symbol, the crest, and we got in. And that's what you have to do when you see the crest on the water. You've got to get in fast. Good thing you did. Yeah, Brianna said, still sounding a little confused. I guess so. Levi put his hand on her shoulder. Hey, Bean, he said softly. It's okay. We're okay, right? Stellar, she said weakly, managing a smile. I'm just a little, wigged out right now. I mean, that monster, Grobel thing, and this cave. How did we get into the desert in the first place? You were in a time of trouble, Ruach spoke gently now, as if he knew what they had gone through. Yes, said Levi. There was this bully that was making trouble, and that weird symbol, the crest, was hanging over his head. It looked so real, so we grabbed it, and the next thing we knew, we were in that desert. And then that monster. Grobel, said Evan. Yeah, whatever. It started to come for us, and the enemy knows when you enter Hordius, so you must always get to water immediately. You must come through the water to enter the cave, said Ruach. It is dangerous to be in Hordius unequipped. Like I told you, said Evan, they need to get their armor, right? Right, Rue? Don't call him that, Xavier said, flicking Evan lightly on the back of the head with his finger. Quit it, Evan said, waving him away. Ruach nodded his hooded head. Yes, your armor. You two must follow me. And he turned toward Xavier and Evan and gave a simple, slow nod as if to say, stay out of trouble until we get back. Then Ruach took off down one of the dark tunnels, which lit up purple as he went. Better follow him, Evan said. He doesn't wait. Come on, Bean, said Levi, still confused but grabbing Brianna by the hand. Let's go. Armor? Brianna turned her nose up at the sight of Xavier and Evan's attire. There's no way I'm wearing that. And she continued to protest as Levi dragged her towards the dark path. So, we're done chapters 5 and 6 today. Next week we'll be doing chapter 7. And, the story is about our walk of faith with Christ. And we can hear about it. Our parents can be Christians. They can have a faith of their own. But as this says, we are the only ones that can make that profession of faith. We have to follow that. And so we can't follow on somebody else's shirt tails. God wants us to be in relationship with him. He wants us to come to him, and he wants to be Lord of our life. And so as this week goes on, I encourage you to pray, to read your Bibles, and to take care of one another. And we will see you soon with another chapter of the Prince Warrior. Have a great week, guys. Talk to you later. Bye.